The day I walked into the bank to book my dream trip to Italy, the teller looked at me with pure pity. "I am sorry, Mrs. Miller," she whispered. "Your account was closed weeks ago. All $450,000 were transferred to your daughter, Tiffany." I felt the room spin. That money was my 35 years of teaching. It was my late husband's legacy. But I did not scream, and I did not beg. Instead, I went home and opened a dusty file from my private family trust. While Tiffany was busy drinking expensive wine in a mansion she built with my stolen life savings, she forgot one thing. The very land her luxury villa sat on was mine. I did not sue her for the money. I simply called the city and the developers to point out her illegal mistake. Today, I am sitting on a balcony in Tuscany, while Tiffany is calling me from a dark studio apartment, sobbing that she has not eaten a real meal in 3 days. Before I tell you how this legal battle ended, please leave a comment and let me know which city or state you are watching from today. I truly enjoy reading your messages. Please note, while this story is a dramatization for entertainment purposes, the message about protecting your heart and your legacy is very real and very important. 35 years. When I sit back and close my eyes, I can still smell it. It is a mixture of floor wax, old library books, and the faint scent of No. 2 pencils being sharpened. That was my life. For 35 long years, I was Mrs. Miller to hundreds of children in a small, quiet suburb. Teaching was never just a job for me. It was a calling. But let us be honest. It was also a grind. I remember the cold Monday mornings when my alarm would go off at 5:30. My joints would ache, and the Pennsylvania winters would be howling outside my window. But I got up. I always got up. I would pack my brown bag lunch, usually a simple turkey sandwich and an apple, because I refused to spend $5 at the deli. To some, $5 is nothing. To a teacher living on a strict budget, $5 was an investment in my future. I remember the parents' evenings that stretched late into the night. I would sit in those tiny plastic chairs, talking to worried mothers and fathers until my voice was hoarse. When I finally got home, my feet would be swollen. I would soak them in warm water and look at my bank statement. Every single month, for 360 months, I watched a portion of my paycheck disappear. It went straight into my 401k account. I lived a very small life so that one day I could live a very big one. I did not buy a new car. I drove my old sedan until the rust was holding the doors together. I did not go on fancy cruises with the other teachers. While they were posting pictures from the Caribbean, I was at home, painting my own kitchen to save on labor costs. My colleagues used to call me frugal. Some even called me cheap. But I had a secret. In my mind, I was already in Tuscany. I could see the rolling hills of Italy. I could taste the olive oil and the fresh pasta. I could feel the warm golden sun on my face as I sat on a terrace, far away from the bells of the schoolhouse. Tuscany was my light at the end of the tunnel. It was the reason I said no to a new coat. It was the reason I worked summer school for 15 years straight. I had a vision board in my bedroom. It was simple. Just a few cutouts from travel magazines and a handwritten note that said, "One day." That one day was supposed to be my reward for a life of service. I had saved $450,000. That was my number. That was my freedom. I thought I had done everything right. I thought I was safe. I truly believed that the hard part of my life was over, and the beautiful part was about to begin. Little did I know that the hardest lesson I would ever have to learn was not in a textbook. It was about to be taught to me by my own flesh and blood. As I entered my late 60s, the world started to feel a little bit faster than I was. My hands were not as steady when I wrote out my checks. The digital world of banking felt like a foreign language that I was struggling to speak. My daughter, Tiffany, noticed. She was always so helpful back then. Or at least, she played the part perfectly. She would come over on Sundays with groceries and a smile. She would sit at my kitchen table, the same table where I used to help her with her multiplication tables when she was 8 years old. "Mom," she said to me one afternoon. Her voice was as sweet as honey. "You are working too hard to manage all of this. What if something happens? What if you get sick, and I cannot access your accounts to pay your medical bills? It was a logical question. It was a question that many children ask their aging parents. It comes from a place of love, or so I thought. We talked about it for weeks. She told me stories about her friends whose parents had strokes, leaving the family in a legal mess because no one had power of attorney. She made me feel like I was being irresponsible by not having a backup plan. I remember the day we went to the bank. It was a bright, sunny Tuesday. Tiffany held my arm as we walked into the branch. She was so attentive. She even brought me a glass of water while we waited for the manager. When the paperwork was placed in front of me, I hesitated for a split second. My gut feeling, that tiny voice in the back of my head, whispered for me to wait. But then I looked at Tiffany. She looked so worried, so concerned for my well-being. I brushed the feeling aside. I told myself that I was being a paranoid old woman. I signed the papers. I gave her joint access to my primary savings and my retirement fund. I told her clearly, "Tiffany, this is only for emergencies. This is my life's work. It is for my trip to Italy and for my care when I am very old." She hugged me. She squeezed me so tight and told me she loved me. She told me I could finally relax. She said she would be my protector. She would be the one to make sure I was never taken advantage of. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders that day. I walked out of that bank feeling like I had a partner. I felt like I had successfully raised a daughter who cared about her mother's legacy. I went home and finally booked the first leg of my trip to Italy. I bought my plane ticket. I felt like a young girl again. I did not know that by signing that piece of paper, I had handed Tiffany the knife she would use to stab me in the back. I had given her the keys to my kingdom, and she was already planning how to burn it down. I trusted her because she was my daughter. I trusted her because I taught her to be honest. But greed is a powerful thing. It can turn a daughter into a stranger in the blink of an eye. I was living in a fool's paradise, blissfully unaware that my $450,000 was already being eyed like a piece of meat by a hungry wolf. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember it clearly because Tuesday was always my day to run errands. The sun was shining, the air was crisp. I wore my favorite light blue sweater, the one I had planned to wear while walking through the streets of Florence. I felt a sense of excitement that I had not felt in years. Today was the day. I was finally going to the bank to withdraw the deposit for my guided tour of Italy. I walked into the local Chase branch. It was a familiar place. I had been banking there for over 30 years. The smell of the air conditioning and the quiet hum of the computers usually felt comforting. I saw Sarah, a teller who had helped me many times. She smiled when she saw me approaching her desk. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," she said. "What can we do for you today?" "Planning that big trip finally?" I smiled back. I felt like a schoolgirl again. "Yes, Sarah. I need to wire the first installment for my travel group. It is time to see the world." I handed her my identification and my account details. I watched her fingers dance across the keyboard. I was already thinking about what I would pack. Should I bring 2 pairs of walking shoes or 3? I was lost in my own happy world. Then, the clicking stopped. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the kind of silence that makes your heart start to race for no reason. I saw Sarah's smile slowly fade. She looked at the screen. Then she looked back at me. Then she looked at the screen again. She bit her lip and leaned in closer to the monitor. "Is everything okay?" I asked. My voice sounded small in the quiet office. Sarah did not answer me immediately. She called over a manager. They whispered to each other while pointing at the screen. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I gripped the edge of the marble counter until my knuckles turned white. Finally, the manager turned to me. She looked at me with a look of pure pity. It was the kind of look you give someone who has just lost a loved one. "Mrs. Miller," she said softly, "I am so sorry. There must be some mistake on your end. This account was closed nearly 2 months ago." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. "Closed? That is impossible. That is my retirement fund. There should be $450,000 in there." The manager shook her head slowly. The entire balance was emptied in a single wire transfer. All $450,000 were moved to an external account. The recipient's name on the file is Tiffany Miller. The room began to spin. The bright lights of the bank became blinding. I had to sit down before my legs gave out. Tiffany, my daughter, my own flesh and blood. She had waited. She had watched. And then she had taken everything. 2 months ago, while I was at home, looking at maps of Italy and dreaming of my sunset years, she was draining my life away. Are you sure? I whispered. Maybe it was a hack. Maybe it was a fraud. The manager looked down at her notes. The transfer was authorized with the joint access credentials you provided. It was done legally. From the bank's perspective, it was a standard transaction between account holders. I could not breathe. 35 years of teaching. 35 years of skipped meals and old clothes. 35 years of saving every single penny. All of it was gone. It was not just money. It was my time. It was my freedom. It was my husband Arthur's legacy. I walked out of that bank like a ghost. I did not even hear Sarah calling after me. I stumbled to my car and sat there in the silence of the parking lot. The sun was still shining, but for me the world had gone completely dark. My daughter was not my protector. She was a thief, and she had stolen my life before I even had a chance to live it. I did not go home. I could not go back to my empty house and sit among my memories. I had to know. I had to see where my 35 years of work had gone. A few weeks prior, Tiffany had mentioned she was moving to a new place. She had been very vague about it. She said she was leveling up. I thought she meant a better apartment, or perhaps a small townhouse. I had no idea that my retirement fund was the foundation of her new life. I drove across town. I watched as the neighborhoods changed. The houses got bigger, the lawns got greener. The trees were perfectly manicured. I finally reached the entrance of a place called the Grand Oaks. It was a gated community. The kind of place with a security guard and a heavy iron gate that required a code to enter. I sat at the gate, my old car idling loudly. I looked at the security guard in his crisp uniform. I felt out of place. I felt like a beggar at a king's palace. I told him I was there to see my daughter. I gave him her name. After a brief phone call, the gate slowly creaked open. As I drove down the winding streets, I saw it. Tiffany's house. It was not a house. It was a villa. It was a massive, 3-story structure made of white stucco and glass. It looked like something out of a magazine. There was a 3-car garage. There was a fountain in the front yard that sprayed water into a marble basin. The contrast made me want to scream. I thought about my small kitchen with the peeling wallpaper. I thought about the way I used to turn off the heat in the winter to save $20 on the utility bill. And here was this, a monument to greed. I parked my car at the curb. My old sedan looked like a piece of junk sitting in front of that mansion. I walked up the stone path. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through deep water. I reached the front door. It was made of heavy, dark oak with gold handles. I did not ring the bell. I pounded on the door with my fist. I wanted her to hear me. I wanted her to feel the weight of my anger. After a moment, the door swung open. There stood Tiffany. She was wearing a designer silk wrap dress. She had a fresh manicure. In her hand, she held a crystal glass filled with an expensive red wine. She looked beautiful. She looked rich. She looked like she didn't have a care in the world. She did not look surprised to see me. She did not look guilty. She simply leaned against the doorframe and sighed. "Mom," she said, "you look exhausted. You really should take better care of yourself." I looked past her into the foyer. I saw marble floors. I saw a chandelier that probably cost more than my first car. I saw the ghost of my 40-year career hanging on the walls in the form of expensive art. "How could you do it, Tiffany?" I asked. My voice was shaking with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. That was my life. That was everything I had. She took a sip of her wine and looked at me with cold, detached eyes. I told you, Mom. I invested it. Why let that money sit in a boring bank account when it could build something real? This house is for all of us. Eventually, you can move into the guest suite in the back. It is for your own security. Security? I shouted. You stole my dream so you could play queen in a gated community. I wanted to see Italy. I wanted to be free. Tiffany just laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. Italy is just a vacation, Mom. This house is a legacy. You are being dramatic. Now, if you are going to keep screaming, I am going to have to ask you to leave. I have guests coming over for a tasting later. She started to close the door. In that moment, I realized that the daughter I had raised was gone. In her place was a stranger who valued stone and glass more than her own mother's soul. I turned around and walked back to my car. I did not look back at the mansion. I did not look back at the fountain. My mind was already moving. Tiffany thought she was safe behind those iron gates. She thought she was untouchable in her white villa. But she had forgotten one very important thing. She had forgotten who her father was. And she had forgotten exactly what he had left for me in the dark corners of our family history. I stood on the threshold of that massive white villa looking at my daughter. Tiffany did not offer me a seat. She did not ask if I was thirsty after the long drive. She simply stood there, swiveling her crystal glass of red wine, watching the dark liquid coat the sides. I could smell the aroma from where I stood. It was a rich, oaky scent. It was the smell of a bottle that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She took a slow sip and looked at the designer dress she was wearing. It was a pale silk that shimmered under the light of the grand chandelier. "Mom," she said, her voice sounding tired, as if I were the one being difficult. "You have to look at the big picture. That $450,000 was just sitting there. It was stagnant. It was losing value every single day because of inflation. I did you a favor by moving it into a real asset." I felt a surge of heat rise to my face. "A favor? Tiffany, you stole it. You did not ask. You did not consult me. You took my retirement fund and bought yourself a palace." She rolled her eyes and walked further into the living room, gesturing for me to follow if I wanted to continue. The floors were made of polished Italian marble. Every step I took felt cold. "I didn't buy this for just me," she insisted, her back to me. "I bought this for the family. Do you know how hard it is to get into a community like this? The property values here are skyrocketing. In 10 years, your $450,000 will be worth $2 million. I am securing our future." "My future was Italy," I cried out. My voice echoed off the high ceilings. My future was the freedom to choose where I go and what I do with the money I earned over 35 years of teaching. Tiffany turned around, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine irritation in her eyes. "Italy is a fantasy, Mom. You are 70 years old. What were you going to do? Wander around Europe by yourself and probably get scammed or fall and break a hip?" It was an irresponsible dream. She stepped closer to me, her voice dropping to a condescending whisper. "I have thought of everything. Look at the plans. There is a beautiful mother-in-law suite at the back of the house. It has its own entrance. It has a little kitchenette. When you get too old to look after that drafty little house of yours, you can move in here. You will be safe. You will be looked after. I am giving you a luxury retirement that you could never have afforded on your own." The sheer arrogance of her words took my breath away. She was talking to me as if I were a child. She was acting as if she had done something noble by robbing me of my autonomy. She had stolen my wings and was now offering me a gilded cage as a favor. "I don't want a suite in your house, Tiffany," I said, my voice trembling. "I want my life back." She sighed and finished her wine in one long gulp. She set the glass down on a marble side table with a sharp clink. "Well, the money is gone, Mom. It is tied up in the equity of this home. You can either be grateful and wait for your room to be finished, or you can keep being dramatic. But honestly, it is embarrassing. I have a reputation to maintain in this neighborhood, and I won't have you coming over here and making a scene." She looked at her gold watch. "I have to get ready for a dinner party. Why don't you go home, take a nap, and call me when you are feeling more rational?" She walked me to the door, her hand firm on my elbow. She didn't hug me. She didn't apologize. She just closed that heavy oak door, and I heard the electronic lock click into place. I stood on the porch, surrounded by the quiet luxury of the gated community, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. I drove home in a daze. The streets I had known for decades looked different now. The world felt colder, sharper. When I finally walked through my own front door, the silence of my house was deafening. I sat at my small kitchen table, the one with the scratched wooden surface, and I looked at the empty chair across from me. For years I had defended Tiffany. When she was a teenager and got into trouble, I was the one who told her father to be patient. When she struggled in college and changed her major 4 times, I was the one who paid the extra tuition and told her it was okay to find herself. I had loved her with every fiber of my being. I thought that love was a shield. I thought that if I gave her enough, she would grow up to be a person of integrity. But sitting there in the dark, I realized the truth. Tiffany didn't see me as a mother. She didn't even see me as a person with my own dreams and desires. To her, I was just a resource. I was an old woman who was done with her life, and therefore, my assets were now her assets. The phrase mother-in-law sweet kept ringing in my ears. It wasn't an act of love, it was a management strategy. She wanted to tuck me away in a back room where she could keep an eye on me while she spent my money on silk dresses and crystal wine glasses. She had taken my dignity. She had looked at my 35 years of hard work and called it stagnant. I felt a profound sense of loss. It wasn't the loss of the money. It was the loss of the daughter I thought I had. That Tiffany was gone. Maybe she never even existed. Maybe I had spent my whole life loving a shadow. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. Instead, a strange, cold calm began to settle over me. It was the kind of calm that comes when you realize that the rules have changed. I had spent my life being a teacher, being a mother, being a wife. I had always put others first. I had always followed the rules of kindness and sacrifice. But Tiffany had broken the most sacred rule of all. She had betrayed the hand that fed her. I stood up and walked over to my desk in the corner of the living room. I pulled out a key that I kept hidden in a small ceramic jar. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. Inside were the documents relating to my late husband Arthur's estate. Arthur had been a quiet man, a surveyor by trade. He didn't have much in the way of cash, but he understood land. He understood that things on paper aren't always what they seem in the real world. He had left me a private family trust. It was something we rarely talked about because it wasn't liquid cash. It was just property. I began to read through the land surveys and the deeds. I looked at the maps of the county. My eyes narrowed as I saw the plot numbers. I remembered Arthur telling me once, "Margaret, never sell these strips of land. Developers are sloppy. They build fast. And they don't look at the old markers. One day, these little pieces of earth might be the only leverage you have." I looked at the address of Tiffany's new villa. Then, I looked at the survey map. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Tiffany thought she had secured her future by stealing mine. She thought she was the smart one, the one who knew how to invest. But she had made a fatal mistake. In her rush to build her palace, she hadn't checked the foundation. Not the physical foundation of the house, but the legal foundation of the land it stood on. I didn't pick up the phone to call her. I didn't send her a text. I didn't need to scream anymore. I simply closed the folder and tucked it under my arm. I walked to my bedroom and slept better than I had in weeks. The bond was broken. Yes, but in its place was something much stronger. I was no longer just a mother. I was a woman who was about to take back her sunset. The house was cold that night. I sat in my old wingback chair, the one Arthur used to sit in every evening after he came home from work. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't listen to the radio. I just sat there in the dark, watching the shadows of the trees dance across the living room wall. My mind went back to Arthur. He had been gone for 5 years, but in moments like this, I could still feel him. Arthur was not a man of many words. He was a land surveyor by profession. He spent his life looking through lenses, measuring boundaries, and marking the earth with iron pins and orange tape. He was a man who believed in the truth of the soil. He used to say to me, "Margaret, people lie. Documents get lost. But the land always remembers where the lines are drawn." Arthur was a meticulous man. He was the kind of person who kept every receipt, every tax record, and every deed in neat, labeled folders. When he was alive, he was always worried about the future. He didn't have a massive life insurance policy, and we didn't have millions in the bank. But he had foresight. I stood up and walked to the closet in the hallway. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down a heavy metal lockbox. It was covered in a thin layer of dust. I brought it back to the kitchen table and opened it with the small silver key I kept on my necklace. Inside was the folder I had looked at briefly the night before. It was titled, "The Arthur and Margaret Miller Family Trust." Tiffany knew about my savings. She knew about my 401k because I had foolishly shown her the statements. She saw the cash, and like a shark smelling blood, she went for it. But Tiffany never cared about the trust. To her, a trust sounded like something old and dusty. It wasn't something she could use to buy a silk dress or a new car. She didn't understand that Arthur hadn't put cash into that trust. He had put something much more valuable. I spread the papers out on the table. There were maps. Hand-drawn maps from 30 years ago. Arthur had spent years quietly buying up small, odd-shaped parcels of land in the county. Some were just narrow strips of dirt behind old farms. Others were wooded lots that looked useless to the average person. But Arthur knew where the town was growing. He knew that one day, these forgotten pieces of earth would be in the middle of everything. He had put all these deeds into the private trust. He had made me the sole trustee. He told me that if anything ever happened to him, I was never to sell these parcels unless I absolutely had to. "This is your anchor, Margaret," he had told me. "It is the ground you stand on." I looked at one specific deed. It was for a long rectangular plot in a part of the county that used to be nothing but oak trees and hills. It was plot number 42. My heart skipped a beat as I looked at the address of the new gated community where Tiffany had built her villa, the Grand Oaks. I remembered when that developer bought the land surrounding plot number 42. They had tried to buy our strip too, but Arthur had refused. He told them the price was too low. He told them he liked the trees. The developer had been angry, but they eventually built around us, or so they thought. I looked at the survey map Arthur had drawn himself, just months before he passed away. He had marked our boundaries with red ink. Then, I pulled up a satellite image of the gated community on my old laptop. I stared at the screen for a long time. I realized that Tiffany's massive white villa, with its 3-car garage and its marble fountain, was sitting exactly where it shouldn't be. The developer had been sloppy. They had assumed they owned the entire hillside. But they didn't. Arthur's red lines went right through the middle of Tiffany's living room. Her entire house was built on land that belonged to my trust. I felt a strange warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't anger. It was a sense of justice. Arthur was still looking out for me. Even from the grave, he was providing me with the tools to defend myself. Tiffany thought she had taken my sunset, but she hadn't realized that I was standing on the very ground she called her own. I closed the box and locked it. I felt a peace I hadn't known since the day I walked into the bank. I wasn't just an old teacher anymore. I was the owner of the ground beneath my daughter's feet. The next morning, I did not call Tiffany. I did not go to her house to argue. Instead, I drove downtown to a small, unassuming office building. I was there to see Mr. Henderson. He had been our family lawyer for over 20 years. He was an older man, even older than me, with thick glasses and a way of speaking that was slow and deliberate. I laid the trust documents on his desk. I showed him the old surveys. I showed him the satellite images I had printed out. Mr. Henderson didn't say a word for nearly 20 minutes. He just studied the maps with a magnifying glass, hummed to himself, and made small notes on a yellow legal pad. Finally, he looked up at me. "Margaret," he said, his voice gravelly, "this is quite remarkable. If these surveys are as accurate as I believe Arthur's work always was, We have a major situation on our hands. How major, Robert? I asked. He leaned back in his chair. It is called a total encroachment. It appears the developer of the Grand Oaks made a clerical error during their initial land survey. They recorded the boundaries of the neighboring lot incorrectly. They built the foundation of that villa and several other structures directly on top of plot number 42, which, according to these deeds, belongs entirely to your family trust. He tapped his pen on the table. And here is the most important part, Margaret. You have been paying the property taxes on this specific plot for the last 15 years. You have the tax receipts. You have the recorded deed. You have established clear, uncontested ownership. What does that mean for Tiffany? I asked. I wanted to hear him say it. Mr. Henderson sighed. It means that legally, that house is an illegal structure. It was built on land that the owner did not authorize for use. In the eyes of the law, the house is trespassing. Under county zoning laws, she cannot hold a clear title to that property. And since she likely used your money as a down payment for a mortgage, her bank is in for a very nasty surprise. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. The court can order that house to be demolished, Margaret. Or you can demand that she buy the land from you at whatever price you choose to set. Since the house is already built and worth millions, you have all the leverage. I thought about Tiffany standing in her silk dress. I thought about her calling my life's work stagnant. I thought about her telling me I was dramatic for wanting to travel to Italy. I don't want her to move out yet, I said quietly. I want her to feel the weight of what she has done. I want the legal process to be swift and absolute. We will start with a formal notice to the developer and the city planning office, Mr. Henderson said. Once they realize the mistake, the bank will be notified immediately. Because the title is clouded, her mortgage will be in technical default. They won't touch a house that is built on someone else's land. I thanked Mr. Henderson and walked out into the bright morning sun. I felt a cold, sharp clarity in my mind. Tiffany wanted to talk about investments. She wanted to talk about securing the future. Well, she was about to learn the most important lesson in real estate. You can build the most beautiful house in the world, but if you don't own the dirt beneath it, you have nothing. I drove past a local park and saw a group of seniors sitting on a bench, laughing and talking. I thought about how Tiffany saw us. She saw us as people who were finished, people who were just sitting there. She didn't realize that we are the ones with the history. We are the ones who know where the pins are buried. I went home and made myself a cup of tea. I sat on my porch and looked at my small, well-kept garden. I had been paying taxes on Tiffany's dream home for years without even knowing it. Every cent I had sent to the county was now a nail in the coffin of her greed. I was not going to be a doormat. I was not going to sit in a mother-in-law suite and beg for her attention. I was Margaret Miller, and I was going to take back what was mine. With Arthur's red lines and Robert's legal letters, I was going to show my daughter that you can never truly build a life on a foundation of lies. I decided not to call the police. That might surprise some people. After all, Tiffany had stolen $450,000 from me, but I knew how the system worked. Because I had given her joint access to the account, the criminal case would be a nightmare. It would be my word against hers. She would claim it was a gift. She would claim I was confused. It would take years in court. And by then, the money would be long gone, buried in the walls of that villa. No. I wanted something faster. I wanted something that she couldn't lie her way out of. I chose to strike where she felt most secure. I chose to strike at her house. I sat in Mr. Henderson's office as he filed the paperwork. The sound of his assistant typing was like a drumbeat. We filed a formal complaint for property encroachment and a petition for an immediate injunction. We were not just asking for a conversation. We were asking the court to recognize that a massive luxury structure was sitting illegally on land owned by the Miller Family Trust. The storm didn't start with a thunderclap. It started with a man in a plain suit and a clipboard. Tiffany was hosting one of her famous garden parties. I knew this because I had seen her post about it on social media. She wanted to show off her new life to the influential people of the community. She was serving organic hors d'oeuvre and expensive champagne. The process server didn't care about her guests. He walked right past the security guard at the gate, showing his official credentials. He walked right up to Tiffany as she was laughing with a group of women near the marble fountain. I wasn't there to see it, but Mr. Henderson's investigator captured the moment from the street. Tiffany took the envelope with a look of annoyance. She probably thought it was a thank you note or a delivery, but as she opened it and saw the official seal of the county court, her face went from tan to a ghostly, sickly white. The lawsuit was public. Within 24 hours, the news began to spread through the gated community. People who had been sipping wine at her house just hours before were now whispering about the illegal villa. The developer was the next to feel the heat. When they received our notice, they panicked. They knew they had made a mistake on the survey for Plot 42. They tried to call me. They offered me a small settlement of $50,000 to quietly sign over the deed. I told Mr. Henderson to tell them no. I didn't want $50,000. I didn't want a quiet settlement. Tiffany called me that night. For the first time in weeks, she didn't sound arrogant. She sounded desperate. "Mom, what are you doing?" she screamed into the phone. "The bank just called me. They are freezing my line of credit because the title is clouded. My neighbors are looking at me like I am a criminal. You are going to ruin everything." I listened to her breathlessly rant for several minutes. I didn't interrupt. I didn't get angry. I just waited for the silence. "Tiffany," I said calmly, "you told me that travel was a luxury and security was a necessity. I am simply securing my property. I am sure you understand. After all, you are the one who taught me about smart investments." I hung up the phone. I didn't feel guilty. I felt a sense of power that I hadn't felt in years. The schoolteacher was gone. The woman who had been bullied by her own daughter was gone. In her place was a woman who knew exactly where her boundaries were drawn. And those boundaries went straight through the heart of Tiffany's living room. The day of the hearing was cold and grey. I wore my best black suit, the one I used for graduations and funerals. Tiffany was there, sitting at the defense table with a high-priced lawyer who looked like he spent more on his hair than I did on my car. She wouldn't look at me. She sat there, staring at her manicured nails, her foot tapping a nervous rhythm on the floor. The judge was a woman about my age. She had sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She looked over the surveys, the deeds, and the tax receipts. Mr. Henderson presented Arthur's hand-drawn maps and the modern satellite overlays. The evidence was undeniable. Tiffany's lawyer tried to argue. He talked about good faith and innocent mistakes. He argued that it would be a hardship to move or demolish a house of that caliber. The judge didn't want to hear it. She leaned over the bench and looked directly at the developer's legal team. "You built a $2 million home on land you did not own," she said. Her voice was like ice. "You ignored the deed markers. You ignored the tax records. This is not a mistake. This is negligence. Mrs. Miller has every right to her property." Then, she turned to the options. Under the law, Tiffany had two choices. She could demolish the portion of the house that sat on my land, which would effectively destroy the entire structure. Or she could buy the land from the Miller Family Trust. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Miller, as the trustee, what is your price for the release of the deed to Plot 42? The room went silent. Tiffany looked up then. She looked at me with a spark of hope in her eyes. I could see her calculating. She probably thought I would ask for the $450,000 back. She probably thought she could just return what she stole and everything would go back to normal. I stood up slowly. I looked at my daughter. I saw the greed that was still there, hidden behind her fake tears. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady. "My late husband, Arthur, spent his life protecting this land. My daughter took my life savings, which were $450,000. She caused me immense emotional distress. She threatened my security in my old age." I took a deep breath. "The price for the land is $900,000. In cash. Within 30 days. Tiffany gasped. Her lawyer jumped up, shouting that the price was outrageous, that it was double the market value of the land. I didn't blink. "The price is what it is," I said. "It is $450,000 for the money she took. And it is $450,000 for the peace of mind she stole from me. That is my final offer. If she cannot pay, I want the house removed from my soil by the end of the month." The judge hammered her gavel. 30 days, she ruled. Either the trust is paid $900,000, or the demolition order will be signed. Tiffany collapsed into her chair. I walked out of the courtroom without saying another word to her. I knew she didn't have the money. She had spent my savings on the down payment, the marble, the wine, and the silk. Her credit was ruined. No bank would lend her another dime on a house that was technically a trespasser. I went to the cemetery that afternoon. I sat by Arthur's headstone and told him what had happened. I felt the wind blow through the trees, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I wasn't alone. I had set the price of my dignity, and that price was absolute. Tiffany had thought she was the one in control. She thought she could take my sunset, but she was about to learn that when you build a house on a foundation of theft, the only thing you truly own is the debt you leave behind. The 30 days passed like a slow, deliberate countdown. I stayed in my small house. I tended to my garden. I did not call Tiffany, and she did not call me, but I didn't need a phone to know what was happening. In the world of high-end real estate, news travels faster than a wildfire, that is to say, dry brush. Tiffany was desperate. I heard through a mutual friend that she had spent every single penny of my $450,000. It was gone. She had used it as a massive down payment to secure a loan for the rest of the villa's cost. She had spent $70,000 on Italian marble that she just had to have for the entryway. She had spent $50,000 on custom silk draperies and designer furniture that cost more than my first home. She had no savings. She had no safety net. She had built a life on a foundation of air. And now, the wind was starting to blow. She tried to get a loan to buy the land from my trust. She went to 3 different banks. But when the loan officers looked at the paperwork, they saw a nightmare. No bank in America will lend $900,000 on a property that is currently under a court order for demolition. No bank will touch a house that is built on land owned by a private family trust. Her credit score, which she used to brag about, began to plummet. The developer, terrified of being sued for their negligence, refused to help her. They told her it was her responsibility to clear the title. The intergenerational investment she had talked about was now a toxic asset. Then came the morning when the white trucks arrived. I was driving past the gated community on my way to the grocery store. I saw the moving vans parked in her circular driveway. But these were not movers that she had hired. These were the men from the furniture company. Because she had missed her payments and because her credit was frozen, they were taking everything back. I saw them carrying out the white velvet sofa. I saw them taking the grand dining table where she had planned to host her tasting parties. Tiffany was standing in the driveway. She wasn't wearing a designer dress that day. She was in an old t-shirt and leggings. Her hair was a mess. She was screaming at the men, waving her hands in the air. Her neighbors, the wealthy people she so desperately wanted to impress, were standing on their own manicured lawns, watching her with cold, judgmental eyes. The bank finally moved to foreclose. They didn't have a choice. The title was clouded, and the mortgage was in default. Within a week, a bright orange notice of foreclosure was taped to that heavy oak front door. Tiffany lost the villa. She lost the marble floors. She lost the fountain. She lost her reputation in the community. She had tried to steal my sunset. But in the end, she couldn't even keep the roof over her head. Her house of cards hadn't just fallen. It had been crushed under the weight of her own greed. I didn't feel a sense of triumph as I watched her life crumble. I felt a deep, quiet sadness. I had raised her to be better than this. But as I turned my car toward home, I realized that some lessons can only be learned in the dark. She had to feel the hunger that her greed had created. 2 years. It is amazing how much can change in 730 days. As I write this, I am sitting on a stone balcony. The stone is warm from the afternoon sun. I am in a small village in the heart of Tuscany, Italy. Below me, the rolling hills are a sea of emerald green and deep gold. I can see the rows of grapevines stretching out toward the horizon. The air smells of wild rosemary, blooming jasmine, and the distant, earthy scent of wood smoke. I did not keep the $900,000. After the foreclosure, the developer was forced to settle with my trust to avoid a massive class action lawsuit from the other homeowners. We reached an agreement. They paid me back my original $450,000, plus interest, and an additional $300,000 for the land and legal damages. I used that money to do exactly what I had planned to do 35 years ago. I sold my house in the suburbs. I gave away the old furniture that held too many painful memories. I packed 3 suitcases and bought a one-way ticket to Rome. My life now is simple, but it is rich in a way that Tiffany will never understand. I wake up when the sun hits the terracotta tiles of my bedroom floor. I walk down to the local market and buy fresh bread, a wedge of cheese, and tomatoes that actually taste like the sun. I am no longer Mrs. Miller, the tired schoolteacher. Here, I am simply Margaret. I am the woman who paints in the town square and speaks broken Italian with the old men at the cafe. The peace I feel is absolute. It is a peace that comes from knowing I stood up for myself. I didn't let my daughter turn me into a doormat. I protected the legacy that Arthur worked so hard to build. Sometimes, as the sun begins to set over the Italian countryside, I think about that marble villa in the gated community. I think about how cold and empty it must have felt, even with the silk curtains and the expensive wine. Here, in my small apartment with the creaky wooden shutters, I have more warmth than a mansion could ever provide. I finally got my reward. It wasn't the money. It was the realization that my life's work was worth defending. I spent 35 years teaching children that actions have consequences. I had to teach my own daughter that same lesson one last time. The sun is dipping below the hills now. The sky is a bruised purple and a brilliant orange. It is the most beautiful sunset I have ever seen. And the best part is, I didn't have to steal it from anyone. I earned it, one day at a time, one pencil at a time, one red line on a survey map at a time. I take a sip of my wine and smile. The light is fading. But for me, everything is finally clear. The evening in Tuscany was perfect. I was sitting on my balcony, watching the long shadows of the cypress trees stretch across the valley. On the table in front of me was a simple but beautiful meal. I had a bowl of fresh pappardelle pasta, tossed in golden olive oil, and topped with shaved truffles I had found at the local market. Beside it sat a glass of sparkling water and a small piece of dark chocolate for later. The air was still. The only sound was the distant chime of a church bell from the neighboring village. I felt a sense of contentment that went all the way to my bones. For 35 years I had been responsible for others. For 35 years I had followed the bells of the schoolhouse. Now, I only follow my own heart. Then, my phone began to vibrate on the table. I looked at the screen. It was an international number, a number from the United States. I took a slow sip of my water and hesitated. I knew who it was. I had not heard from Tiffany in over 18 months, not since the day the bank took the keys to her villa. I pressed the button and held the phone to my ear. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "Mom? Mom, are you there?" The voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the voice of the confident woman in the silk dress. It wasn't the voice of the person who had called my dreams dramatic. This voice was thin. It was shaking. It sounded like a hollow shell of the daughter I used to know. I took a deep breath. "I am here, Tiffany." Suddenly, the sound of sobbing broke through the line. It was a jagged, desperate sound. "Mom, please. I didn't know who else to call. Everything is gone. I am living in a studio apartment in a bad part of the city. It is the size of a closet. The heat doesn't work, and the windows are cracked." She paused to gasp for air. I didn't interrupt. I looked out at the beautiful Italian hills and remembered the way she had stood in her marble foyer and looked down at me. "They repossessed my car last month," she continued, her voice rising in a panic. "I lost my job because I couldn't get to the office. Mom, I haven't eaten a real meal in 3 days. I have been living on crackers and tap water. My stomach hurt so much. Please, I am begging you. Just send me $200 so I can get some groceries. I am your daughter. You can't let me starve. I sat there in the warm Italian breeze. I looked at my bowl of pasta. I thought about the 3 days she mentioned. 3 days of hunger. It sounded terrible. But then, I thought about the 35 years of my life. I thought about the thousands of days I spent working while I was tired. The thousands of days I skipped, buying something for myself, so that she could have a better life. I remembered the cold, arrogant look in her eyes when she told me that my life's work was just sitting there. I remembered her telling me that travel was a luxury I didn't need. Tiffany, I said. My voice was steady and calm. It was the voice I used to use when a student was caught lying in my classroom. Do you remember what you told me at the door of your villa? You told me that security was a necessity and travel was a luxury. There was a silence on the other end of the line. I have taken your advice, I continued. I have invested in my security. I have invested in my travel. My money is currently being used for my own sunset, just as I planned for 35 years. I am currently in Tuscany. The pasta is delicious, Tiffany. The wine is rich, and the peace is something you cannot put a price on. Mom, please, she cried. How can you be so cruel? I am starving. I am not being cruel, Tiffany, I replied softly. I am a teacher. You once told me that my money was losing value because of inflation. You told me it was better to invest it in a real asset. Well, perhaps you can find an investment that will pay for your dinner tonight. Perhaps you can look at your silk dresses or your designer shoes and see what they are worth now. I paused for a moment, letting the weight of the words settle. You thought you could steal my sunset, Tiffany. You thought I was an old woman who was finished with her life. But being a mother does not mean being a doormat. I spent my life feeding you, and you repaid me by trying to starve my future. I am sorry, she sobbed. I am so sorry. I know you are, I said. But you are only sorry because you are hungry. You weren't sorry when you were drinking wine in your mansion. Sometimes, the best way to love someone is to let them feel the hunger that their own greed created. It is the only way you will ever learn the value of $1 and the value of a mother's heart. I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't want to hear any more excuses. I simply tapped the screen and ended the call. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. It was a weight I had been carrying for decades. For the first time in my life, I wasn't responsible for her mistakes. I wasn't the one who had to fix everything. I picked up my fork and took another bite of the pappardelle. It tasted like freedom. Tiffany ended up sitting in the dark, but it was a darkness she had built with her own hands. I realized then that justice is not always about a courtroom or a judge. Sometimes justice is just a quiet evening on a balcony, 3,000 miles away from the person who tried to break you. I finished my meal and watched as the first stars began to twinkle over the vineyards. I was Margaret Miller. I was a teacher. I was a traveler. And finally I was free. As the sun begins to set over the rolling hills of our quiet little town, I find myself sitting here on the porch, rocking slowly in this old wooden chair. The air smells like rain, and the jasmine my neighbour, Mrs. Gable, planted last spring. It is funny how the smallest things can bring back the heaviest memories. Looking back at what we talked about today, I cannot help but feel a deep sense of peace. You know, life has a way of coming full circle. I remember when my husband Arthur and I first started in that tiny apartment over the bakery on Main Street. We did not have much, maybe $20 in our pockets on a good week. But we had a spirit that could not be broken. I was thinking about the story I shared earlier, about the time I had to choose between my own comfort and helping a stranger. It was not a grand gesture. It was just $75. That was all. At the time, $75 felt like a fortune. It was the money I had saved for a new winter coat. But when I saw that young mother at the grocery store, counting her pennies just to buy milk for her baby, well, my heart just decided for me. I told her, "Honey, Please take this. I have everything I need. She tried to say no. She looked at me with those tired eyes. Eyes that reminded me so much of my own mother during the hard years. But I insisted. I told her that one day she would be the one sitting on a porch, looking back and realizing that kindness is the only currency that never loses its value. We live in a fast world now. Everything is digital. Everything is loud. But for those of us who have walked this earth for 60 or 70 years, we know the truth. We know that the real gold is found in the quiet moments. It is found in a hand held tight. It is found in a promise kept. I want you to think about that tonight. Think about your own legacy. It is not about the numbers in a bank account or the size of a house. It is about the people who will remember your name with a smile. I am so grateful you spent this time with me. It feels like we are just two friends sitting together, sharing a cup of warm tea while the fireflies start to dance in the grass. Before I let you go, I want to say one more thing. Do not ever think it is too late to make a difference. Even at our age, especially at our age, we have a wisdom that the world desperately needs. Take care of yourself. Sleep well. And remember, you are never alone as long as you carry love in your heart. I will be right here waiting for you next time. We have so many more stories to tell, don't we? Good night, my dear friend. Good night.